If you don't know who we are, we offer leadership and behavioural change products and services to multinational companies, large public sector organisations and SMEs within the UK and globally. I'm Laura Bradshaw.
And I'm Eleanor Boniface. And we will be your hosts for the upcoming podcast, where we will bring voices of these experts to you directly to give you insightful and innovative updates on all aspects of the world of people and organisational development. Thank you for joining us for part 2 of All Things Rapid Evolution. In part 1, we discussed what it is and why organisations need it. So if you haven't already, it's definitely worth listening to.
We are going to take a slightly different approach to this episode and leave it in the professional hands of Zara and Daniel. Daniel is one of our lead principal consultants, Facet 5 expert, and all-round great guy. Daniel, welcome, and please introduce yourself to our listeners.
Thanks, Laura. Hi, everyone. As Laura said, I'm responsible for making sure that our clients understand how to use Facet 5, which is a type of personality profiling, to get the most out of their leaders and to lead their teams in the best way that they can. So that's the main sort of part of what I get involved in.
Thank you, Daniel, and of course, welcome back, Zara. So over to you.
Excellent. So a couple of months ago, when we started talking about rapid evolution, Zara got in touch with me because I work daily with clients on looking at their personal development and their team development, and we use the Facet 5 profiling approach as a way of understanding our strengths and preferences and so on. And we started to have a discussion about are organisations and people and teams predisposed to behaving and thinking in a particular way, and if they are, what challenges does that create, but also what strengths does it set them up with when it comes to rapid evolution. So good to see you, Zara. What I thought would be really good to start with is could you just sort of give us a brief recap of the key themes of what we mean when we talk about rapid evolution, and then we kind of start to talk about what it means for people and their preferences.
Yeah, no worries. So we discussed on podcast 1, rapid evolution, what it's all about, where it came from. So basically, Jill, who is CEO for Kiddy and T3, and in fact, a number of our consultants were out with their clients, and we're hearing the same themes about change, about the pace of change, about how hard it is these days to keep up with and even, stay ahead of change and competitors. So I was tasked with looking into what is it that organizations who are able to change, keep ahead of the curve, or even grow at a faster rate than the rest of the market, what is it that they do? So I looked into this, and this is where I came across this term, rapid evolution. Haven't just made it up. It's an actual term I came across in biology. So rapid evolution is what's used to describe the fact that although evolution is considered to be a really slow process. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's still fairly slow. However, when the environment around things, people, animals, etc., is really challenging, they've identified this phenomenon that evolution is sped up. So some animals have evolved at a much quicker rate than you might otherwise expect. And a lot of it, we've identified what the principles are in business. So I'd say probably listen to podcast 1 to go into detail about all of those. But what it means in biology is that they have essentially quite a diverse range, a diverse pool, which in a VUCA kind of context, when you don't know, what's going to confront you in the future, it's unpredictable, it's ambiguous, it's complicated. It's really good to set yourselves up with as much diversity within the pool as you can, because of course then it's a bit like having a Swiss Army knife in your pocket. You can, go down any particular track that you might need to. And that's essentially what happens in rapid evolution. So when I came across that, I instantly thought, this is a little bit like personality. So we know that in any team, you want so a balance in terms of personality, a balance in terms of that cognitive diversity, and it made me think about you. So kind of pulled you in, didn't I? Daniel, let's think about this in terms of personality. What are the implications of the sort of tensions? We identified the 5 tensions that we spoke about in podcast 1. What are the implications of that for personality? And lo and behold, you went away and came back with loads of insights. So can you just remind me when I sort of explained about rapid evolution to you and these tensions that teams and companies have to sort of balance, and it's all about balance. It's flexing between the key tensions that exist. It's not spending too much time in questioning, but it's not about being overly confident as well. So it's a little bit of that productive paranoia. It's a little bit of, it's flexing between the two. So can you cast your mind back in terms of what first sprung to mind when you looked at those tensions? Are there any that particularly jumped out at you, or what were your overall sort of ideas and thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're talking about, you mentioned VUCA, so we're talking volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environments, and I think we are led to believe now that most organisational environments are like that. So I think I've heard you talk about change being a skill set that you need to have rather than something you switch on and you switch off. So that made me think. My first thought was around steady state versus continuously changing. And me being me, started to think about what that means in terms of someone's natural capabilities, i.e. their personality preferences. And if you think about it, and I think about lots of people that I know, and I think about people I work with, there's a split between people who like things to be as they are and people who enjoy surprises, enjoy what might be around the corner. So, and those manifest in our profiles quite often. So, for example, if you think of the classic control continuum, you've got low control through to high control, and you might say that somebody who likes their world to be structured, organised, predictable, and relatively free of surprises will be somebody who finds change difficult and therefore struggles to work with rapid evolution or to evolve rapidly. People who are low control like to take the world as it comes. So let's see how we get on. Let's not set it up with too much of a plan, because we want to be intuitive. We want to be able to turn on a sixpence or a dime if you're across the Atlantic. The idea there that the steady state versus the continuously evolving, moving state, I think, is a natural part of who we all are. And we're either, we can either be very flexible, which obviously most people will likely be, or we'll be somebody who is very locked in the way things should be and are meant to be, or the way things could be. So that you've got this really interesting dynamic within each individual person. So that's where my mind went first, because obviously we'll go into some of these behaviours that we've looked at, these tensions. But the immediate thing for me around rapid evolution was you talked about wolves in Chernobyl in the radiation zone. What exists within their biology that allowed them to adapt so relatively quickly? And I know personality isn't biology, but there is a link to physiology at least. So, yeah, that's where I first went, and I was intrigued initially by the fix the vision, flex the journey. Where did you get that from?
Oh God, I think I didn't create it. So it's something that an eminent leader somewhere in the world has sort of used that term before, and it really resonated when it comes to the whole concept of rapid evolution. Fix the vision, flex the journey. And as you were just talking there, I was going to ask, do you think, because one of the assumptions is that for those who do prefer a bit more structure and a bit more clarity and being able to predict, as generally speaking, lots of us do anyway, but as you say, there are individual differences. Do you think it can help to emphasize the vision as a stable, continual thing? Because it's long term, it shouldn't change day to day, that the vision, if communicated regularly, could provide a little bit of stability. I'm just springing it on you, but have you seen examples where that has helped teams or in companies?
Yeah, completely. I work with at least 2 clients who have a North Star, and they call it their North Star. In other words, if you're not heading in that direction, you're not going. You're not heading in the you're not going the right way. But the North Star is a wonderful analogy, actually, because obviously it's right, thousands, millions, however many miles away. So it's over there. Between here and how we get there is subject to all the rules of VUCA plus market changes, economic changes, socio-geographical changes, everything. So the idea that fixing the vision is important. I think it is important. It's an anchor point for people. And I definitely work with lots of clients, and we know commonly organisations have to have a vision, because a vision is what conceptually what gets us out of bed in the morning. In other words, why are we doing what we do? So that's our certainty. Our certainty is we're heading in this direction. Our uncertainty is, okay, so are we travelling by land, sea? Are we climbing over rocks? Are we going through a swamp? Are we flying? Are we flying? Whatever it might be. So yeah, absolutely. I think fixing the vision can provide people with an anchor point, definitely.
And then on the other hand, sorry, I just had another thought as you were talking. So one of the key principles that we identified, so companies who do this really well, it's this concept of less is more. So you can't move fast on a million priorities all at once. It was really about this decluttering, streamlining, being really sharp on your priorities. So it strikes me that there's another challenge here for the people who are at the other end of the real high openness to experience, love new things, really curious, that there's a bit of a challenge there as well in terms of having a degree of diversity and a degree of curiosity and what we call productive paranoia, that looking outside, questioning what's new, what's changed, but also not doing that all of the time, because we can't have people going off down avenues that are going to create too much lack of alignment. So it's balancing that with unified alignment, that getting everybody sort of cohesively aligned behind some small set priorities. So
yeah, again, it's back to the question of these represent conflicts within any one particular individual quite often. So if, for example, you talked about curiosity there, one of the things that I will talk to people about is their ability to diverge versus converge on information, and that generally tends to be a preference. I say preference, we have a stronger leaning towards one or the other, quite possibly. And the need to be flexible around, okay, so when are we going wide, casting the net wide, thinking it was the best ideas possible, versus when are we actually funneling down onto one particular item that we're going to do. So this idea of less is more, again, it needs to flex. And if you're talking about how to keep teams up with it, just thinking about our exam question on this conversation we're having, I think it's the leader's role is to get people comfortable with moving between when have we got carte blanche to explore versus when we have to narrow down and get our heads down and actually focus on one thing. And they're two very different styles of individual quite often. But equally, what's also interesting is when you go to particular disciplines, there'll be a tendency to want to do one or the other, and the underlining the importance of being flexible is crucial, and leaders being aware of that. So functionally, some parts of an organisation are set up to run the business, and to run the business, you do things in a particular way, and you have processes, and you have policies, and you have operating procedures, etc. That's the way things are done. But some of what we're talking about requires groups of people to say, actually, we don't need to do it like this, or we need to look at how we do it and find out how we can be quicker or more efficient or make it cost less. So yet again, you're talking about different natural tendencies in people that won't naturally. I say they do coexist, because you can have people in groups that occupy all of these ranges, but they might not necessarily sit down in a meeting together and hit it off, because they have very differing perspectives.
As you were speaking, you just into my head popped the analogy of the leader as the kind of orchestra conductor, because you've got, as you say, individuals and teams, each with different preferences, each with different focus or slightly different parts of the journey where they want to take a little, detour perhaps. And it really sort of, gave me the impression of the leader having to step back and have that very wide view, also have in the back of mind where we're heading, to be able to kind of balance those tensions. If somebody needs to, or a team needs to be reeled in and be encouraged to flex more in the opposite direction, to be juggling all of that, difficult job, right?
Yeah, I do like I love the orchestra analogy, because not only have you got groups of instruments, you've also got single instruments, like perhaps your pianist or sometimes your percussionist. There might only be one. It's a small orchestra. They don't all play at the same time either. So this whole without going too, it's the conductor's role to control the dynamics, set the pace, everything like that. But crucially, not playing the instruments. That, a whole different challenge that we have with leaders is stopping them. Get off the piano. You're not the pianist, or leave the violins alone. It could go on forever, this analogy, couldn't it? But I do think, in terms of how to keep teams up with the pace of change, obviously the leader has to set the tone and the pace and the mood. Yeah, absolutely. And talking of pace, if I bring in another dynamic, because we talked about looking at the span of the control scale, if you like, and how an individual can exist somewhere along that scale and be either very flexible about how structured life is, or they can be, one to either way. And we've mentioned curiosity, which aligns with the facet 5 affection scale, but pace is about energy. So talking about rapid evolution, we can't really not mention the rapid part. And the rapid part implies that perhaps we need to do things with less thought, or without stopping to think too much in depth. And so your more introverted population will want to consider things in great depth, which will add value in some of the. So I'm looking at the behaviours that we've come up with, and enlightened empathy, for example, requires depth of thought, consideration. But if we're to evolve rapidly, we've got to do it quickly. So, and that implies to me that you need some element of energy in the team. And if you've got a team that have a tendency towards deeper thought, reflection, and possibly don't communicate with each other unless they need to, or prefer not to, you've got a challenge there as well. You've got a challenge around let's do this. And that needs a fairly high energy or confidence.
Yeah. And does creativity come into that a little bit as well? Because we've got that tension between enlightened empathy, which is, as you say, really getting in there, really understanding, whether it's your customer or your employee base, to be able to make decisions based on that, and often data driven, customer data driven, or employee data driven, in contrast to what we call leap of faith. So, the problem with data driven decision making is if the future doesn't follow the same path as the past, because all of our data, of course, is backward looking. So there's that little bit of based on that data, based on your expertise, can we try to make a prediction? And possibly that means bringing in a little bit of creativity. Like Apple, for instance, is really good at coming up with new products, new services that people didn't actually know they wanted yet. Sometimes people don't know what they want, and therefore the data wouldn't have told us that. So it's a little bit about having that courage to, I suppose, read between the lines in the data. Perhaps some people might call it expert sort of decision-making intuition, maybe, which is underpinned by expertise and experience. You're just joining the dots, really, aren't you? But what do you think about that? Where does that sit in terms of creativity? So I suppose it's the comfort of going beyond what the data says. Is it a little bit of creativity?
Yeah, definitely. I think the Apple story is interesting, and someone told me once, I don't know if this is true, so disclaimer, everyone, but the iPod was a byproduct of another idea, and the iPod obviously was one of what put them on the map in many ways, in terms of portability of music and accessibility of music, but it was an offspring of an idea around storage and file structure and so on. So yeah, it's a bit of serendipity there. But you're asking a question about using data intuitively and being brave with it. Creativity. I mean, we've learned a lot about creativity recently in our organisation. One of the things that occurs to me is that creativity comes from a number of different places, and creativity does not have to mean beanbags, wacky offices with no desks and chairs, that kind of thing. Creativity has a process which is really interesting. It just requires different thought patterns in that process. So even something like innovation has to, you've got the idea that creativity is new ideas, right? And innovation is making money out of them. So you need to have innovation as a company, because otherwise you're wasting your creativity. So organizations, to be able to harness that, need to know. You come up with a million creative ideas, you have to be able to understand which one of those will your customers like. Apple happen to understand that people do want a 14th version of the iPhone, and people will probably want a 15th version of the iPhone, etc., etc. And you only make these decisions by understanding who your audience is. And I think that there is that leap of faith. The questions around the word faith, because I think you don't take too much of a leap of faith without understanding who wants what. And again, you've got a vast difference. You've got vast differences in diversity across the way people feel about that kind of idea. So the risk tolerance, we've talked about risk tolerance. You need to have a reasonable degree of confidence that with rapid evolution, there's going to be an element of risk involved. How do you help teams feel comfortable with levels of risk? Because people with I've talked about the degree of structure and control in the world of Facet 5. There's also the world of emotionality, and the world of emotionality within Facet 5 will tell you that the higher your emotionality levels are, the more responsive you'll be, the more alert and perceptive you might be to what's going on around. So surely that's a great quality to have when you're deciding, should we do this or not? But you need your people with the flexibility to say, we're good with this, it's going to be okay. The optimism of the lower emotionality style of individual who is less concerned, less cautious, you need to be able to harness both of them, but for different purposes almost.
It's interesting what you said about emotionality and those people being really sensitive to picking up on cues, I suppose. That's kind of my reading of what you were talking about. Does that mean that they might be good? Because, before I go off on that tangent, but does that mean that they might be good at noticing when a team is getting stuck too much and not flexing enough to either side of these different tensions? Whether it's, I don't think we're embracing risk enough, or I think we're being too risky here, or I think we're getting too stuck in the data and not going beyond the data, or, I think we are, what else? What do we have? Diverging too much. We need to converge. We need to come down, and we need to focus a bit more. Would people high in emotionality be good at recognizing what's going on in a team, I suppose is what I'm asking, or not necessarily? And if not, then who would be? How can we equip teams to be really good at recognizing what's actually going on in their team to balance?
Yeah. There will undoubtedly be natural strengths of leaders who have access to the sort of more emotional side of who they are. So if they're higher in emotionality, they will be watchful, perceptive, and who doesn't want a leader that's watchful, perceptive, and observant? So you could say that if you've got high degrees of emotionality, you will be someone who notices things, reads the room. That's a popular phrase, or has been. But you need to think about the risks as well, and the risks are counterbalanced by the people who are lower on the emotional side. The risks of the higher side is that you'll carry everything really heavily on your shoulder. You'll be really self-critical, and you may be cautious. So it's to answer your question, yeah, absolutely. I think a leader that's tuned in to how people are feeling, who wouldn't want a leader like that?
To move forward.
However,
anyway,
it needs to be one that's got the self-confidence and the steeliness. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. Are there any other things when you're working with teams where, let's say, as often is the case, you've got people with quite different preferences? How do you help them to kind of self-regulate? I mean, I suppose there's at the individual level, help each individual to self-regulate. I suppose make them aware, first of all, of their preferences. But then as a team, what strategies can they use to try and help each other or the team self-regulate?
Yeah, I mean, I'm right in the thick of work at the moment around teams that are transforming in a digital sense. So it's quite major. And the opportunity to talk to every single team member about their own natural tendencies and then bring them together and ask them to explore the differences that sit within that team, that's the crucial stuff. So being able to facilitate conversations around things like, well, the areas we've talked about, how rigid do you like things to be? How flexible, how responsive and watchful do you want people to be? So working with teams who understand their preferences and each other's is really, really helpful. And in that way, we're supporting leaders in getting more of an insight into who they're, what have we got here? What have we got to work with? So I think it's really, really, really important to do that. And in terms of how do we change behaviour, because that's the goal, that's the goal of it. It's about teams signing up and agreeing collectively about how they're going to work, but also be really clear that obviously back to the idea of rapid evolution, the pace of change, that isn't going to go away. It's not going to go away. So, the big thing in the news at the moment is about AI taking over the world. I'm pretty sure I did a piece of work 7 or 8 years ago, and that was a headline. So it's doing the rounds again. However, it's a reality. So what are we, how are we best set up to handle it, and what do we do?
Yeah, brilliant, really important. I think we probably need to wrap up.
Really? Wow, that's gone quickly.
We could probably talk a long time about this, but you've also just created a useful link in my head to the next podcast, because we've spoke about preferences within teams, that we need to sort of help them recognise, balance different preferences that might pull them in different directions. But of course, also there's things in the broader context, the culture. So in the next podcast, we're going to talk about how we might look at the organisational culture in terms of rapid evolution. What sorts of things, whether it's, processes or the way that we, just the way we do things around here, that sort of, general informal definition of culture. What is it in that could help or hinder rapid evolution? So watch this space. But Daniel, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Great talking to you as ever.
Absolutely. Enjoyed it. Thanks very much.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, New Ways, New Habits. If you enjoyed listening and want to hear more about rapid evolution, we'll be joined by Zara for part 3, where we'll be identifying whether your organisational culture is slowing you down and what you can do to remove blockers.
To find out the release date, follow us on LinkedIn, and you can find all future podcasts on Spotify, SoundCloud and Apple. We really are the whole package.
And it wouldn't be right without saying, don't forget to provoke, plant and practice these new ways and new habits.